My name is Gary. I'm your host at Mindset Growth Podcast. I have Heather, my co-host, with me today. How are you today, Heather?
I'm good. It's like our last Indian summer here today, so
I know.
I think we're on the downhill slide now.
For the first time this summer, it's been getting dry. We've had a tremendous amount of rain and really a cool, very pleasant summer. So we're changing all that.
Yeah.
Kids are back in school.
Kids are back in school. They got let out early both Friday and today for heat.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, let's bring on our guest. And I'm excited to learn more about our guest. I feel like it's a very interesting life that has maybe taken a few different turns over the course of time. So let's explore that. Want to welcome Steve Acho to Mindset Growth Podcast. Steve, welcome.
Thank you so much. So nice to be here.
Appreciate you taking the time to jump on. There's a lot of different things that really intrigued me when I read through your bio, but one thing we like to do is really start with the foundational beginning. So would you tell us a little bit about yourself maybe, and like where you now live, and then we can dive into maybe how you grew up and kind of move forward from there.
No problem. So I live in the Detroit area, and I was born and raised here. I've always lived here, other than about 4 years living in Japan. So I learned to speak Japanese. I went to Japan right after high school. I got a work study program, started doing interpreting and translating, and then ended up getting various jobs just because I was bilingual and learning different businesses. And so that's just taken me in so many different directions. And separately from that, one of my passions has been music. I am a self-taught musician. I play piano, a little bit of guitar, and I sing, I write songs. I've been doing that for quite a long time. I have an IT staffing and consulting company. And so I'm one of those guys that it's really hard. You know, you meet someone at a cocktail party and they're like, "Hey, nice to meet you, Steve. What do you do?" And I'm like, depends on the day. It's hard to answer. So my website, steveacho.com, really isn't optimized to sell you anything. It really just answers the question, what do you do? And these are all of my kind of business endeavors. And one way that I've decided to put them all together, or it just kind of happened, and I can tell you the story, is in addition to running the businesses that I'm in and doing music and putting music out there, I've been doing keynote speeches for the last 2 years. And I love doing that because it ended up being something that, like I said, it's hard to categorize me, right? I'm not like a finance guy or a lawyer or something that's, a world-class anything, right? And what I noticed was that in all of the areas of my life, whether personal or professional or athletic, there's a common theme or methodology, I guess, or a framework that I kind of backed into and deconstructed and figured out that I'm basically a professional hack. I just learn how to do the things that I want to do as efficiently as possible. And I think that there's a method for doing that really can work for everyone. And so that feels great to be able to do that. I mean, I've done, talks for optimist clubs and charities and stuff, and I've done it for large organizations. And, the message really rings true no matter who the audience is. So I've really enjoyed I'm 52 years old. So I've had lots of different business experiences in different industries. And it's kind of a way for me to capture everything and put it together, all the things that I do. So I can tell you the story about how I wrote 2 books, one on this subject and one on another subject. And I can tell you the story about how I consulted for someone and this was the result.
Right.
And it's not really about me doing these things. It's hopefully the story and the framework will inspire people that believe I'm too old to learn a new language, for example, or technology is too hard, or, I can show you, not impress you, but I can impress upon you in a way that you can be inspired by your own enormous potential to achieve anything that can be achieved by being better at it. Communication, relationships, health, wealth, whatever it is. So That's
let's
kind of Steve Acho 3.0 or whatever version I'm on right now. I don't know.
okay. So let's dive back or take a step back. And growing up, like, what was that like? What was your childhood experience?
So I grew up in a suburb of Detroit in Michigan, and had a very different upbringing than my father. So my mother was born in Michigan. She's Polish. My father was born in Baghdad and
Oh,
lived there for 10, 11 years. And his father, my grandfather, applied for a visa for 18 years just to try to come to this country.
wow.
Uh, Finally got it and had kids at the time and had to come by himself and scrounge together money and send for his kids and have them all come. And he had a very different upbringing than me, which I
Right.
really appreciated. And then, I mean, my dad is just, my parents have still been married 53 years happily.
Awesome.
They're both, big inspirations. But I've always looked up to my dad and understood the perspective that he has. I mean, he went from not speaking a word of English to getting just full scholarships for master's programs in engineering and business, and worked for Ford
Wow.
Company his entire career, worked for Bill Ford, traveled the world. He's just an incredible inspiration to a lot of people, but especially me.
Hmm.
So coming from that background, the piece that always intrigues me is because a lot of people have backstories, but what was important to your parents for their kids or for you to learn? Was it like, was it important for education? Was it important for cross culture experience? What were some of those things that were impressed upon you early?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I had to say it in a word, I would say opportunity. I am so lucky. The older that I get, and the more close friends that I have that are able to be vulnerable and kind of, we use each other as therapists in a way. And I learn about their upbringing. I realize how I won the parent lottery. And everyone that knows my parents will say that. So I do not have any kind of story where there's trauma that I know of.
Right.
Hmm.
I mean, they've always been such great supporters of my sister and I. My dad in particular was definitely felt like grades were important, doing well in school was important, and not because I remember arguing like I didn't like school like most people. I'm 15 years
Right.
old. I'm like,
Hmm.
who's going to hold a gun to my head and ask me to factor an equation or tell me what a hypotenuse is? And, he's like, well, it teaches you how to learn. And if you get a degree, it gives you opportunities. And I was like, well, I'm going to have my own business. I'm going to own a health club. Or I used to play tennis. I said, I'm going to be a
Right.
tennis pro. And he said, fine, you can do all that. But I'll support whatever you want to do. But I want you to have opportunities. So that would be
Right.
the word. And I think that's timeless, wise advice,
Hmm.
Right.
whatever that means for the mode of the day, right? So if I had
Right.
children right now, I would have them dive into all of the AI tools, and instead of fighting them, I would have them learn how to be the best version of themselves with the technology that we have.
Right. That's very interesting. Uh, it seems like there's always something we learn from our parents.
Mm.
Sometimes it's in a positive fashion, like what you were talking about. Other times, sometimes it's like, okay, this person decided I'm going to learn, but I'm going to do opposite.
Right. That's
So
exactly
it's
right.
very incredible how that happens. And to me, it's intriguing to find out what different cultures are like and, how that shapes and forms people. Because certainly, I don't know a lot about Baghdad. Clearly, in the last 30 years, it's been on our headlines a lot here in
Sure.
America just because of the
Conflict.
events that have transpired.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But I don't know much about what life would have been there. But I was going to let you had a question I know you wanted to ask.
I don't know. I don't think it's so much of a question, but just an observation, I guess, of, yourself being the first generation born in the United States, coming from your dad's side. I'm sure that really impresses so much more upon you from your dad and your grandpa of how to learn and how important it is to give yourself those opportunities because, they probably didn't have those over there, I'm guessing. So I think for kids now, myself included, we just take education for granted. We know that, we can start at 3 years old, 3-year-old preschool
Mm.
if if your area has that, and just continue going. And not everybody has those opportunities. So I think that's a huge difference too from yourself being.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, I feel like I was extremely lucky to have every possible opportunity like that growing up. And that's, I remember complaining that my Coke wasn't cold enough. I needed ice. And then my dad reminded me that he used to pick flies out of his water when he was lucky enough to get it. And that shut me up real quick.
Yeah. Totally.
I'm sure
that happened, interestingly enough. I am doing my first TED Talk in a few weeks.
Okay.
Awesome.
The topic of the talk is called Unity. And it's also the name of a song that I wrote that I will kind of debut there at the TED Talk in Detroit. And it will be released a few days before that. But kind of to the point that we're all talking about, and what I've taken away from my father and his mentality is that he always says you can be proud. He's very proud of our heritage, and also very proud to be U.S. citizens. That was a choice.
Right.
And so I've kind of had this meme in my head that I'm fortunate enough to have written a song about, and be asked to speak on the topic of really, can you be proud of who you are without being anti anything else, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a world where understandably people want to find solidarity with other like-minded people,
right?
And generally a healthy thing. But my pitch really, and my perspective on it is that sometimes there are more useful ways to find unity and solidarity. And the best line for this that I'm going to quote is Mother Teresa said, don't ever invite me to an anti-war rally, but if you're having a peace rally, let me know where it is. Right. And it's like, this is semantic. This is
right.
Real thing. Like, you can fight for something and come together and plant trees, or you can hold picket signs in front of a factory and say, big bad capitalism or whatever. And, I'm not making an argument about, what's right and wrong. But what I am saying is sometimes there are more useful ways. Those two groups want the same outcome.
Right.
Yeah.
In my mind, the kind of mantra that I use, just literally every day, it pops up 1,000 times. It just popped up at the grocery store. How can I be useful? I saw an older woman trying to get into her car and load her groceries, and I don't even have to think about it. Of course, I'm going to help her put the groceries in, make sure she's in the car. But I extend that to friends and friends of friends, and I'm always thinking, how can I be useful? And I'm positing that if many people walked into relationships, business or romantic or friendships or business partnerships, really a networking meeting, right, with the mantra, how can I be useful? That will get you farther, and that will actually make the world a better place in a small way, right?
And the thing that comes to my mind when you talk about Mother Teresa and just give those examples, I think, and I can only speak from an American perspective, but I have to believe a lot of that's probably universal around the world, but it's so much a need to be right or to have somebody be wrong. And the thing,
I like how you said that.
And we do some coaching as well, business coaching. And the one thing that we have really tried to shift focus towards is it effective or is it not effective?
It's great.
And so when you make a decision, it's harder for me or any human to say, hey, I was wrong. But we can go out and try something new. And if we can then analyze it and say, hey, that wasn't effective, let's make some adjustments. Now it changes where it pulls from. And I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about, but that's a awesome example there. And that's something that I think the message needs to get out everywhere. We don't need to agree, but we can fight for common causes.
Constructive conflict even, right?
Yeah.
We can agree on the outcome that we want.
Right. And there's going to be different ways to get there. But so you finish up with high school and then you kind of move on. Did what took you to Japan? Was it a college experience or what got you over there?
I think so. I've been in martial art my entire life since I was a child, watching Bruce Lee movies and all that. And, So I've been doing that. I still do it. I did it today. I do MMA, so punch kick, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I did judo in Japan. So I've always been into that stuff. And when I was a kid and I first got into karate, we were, punching and we were counting to 10 or 20 in Japanese. And then we had to memorize the names of the kicks in Japanese. And I have a good ear. That's probably the only thing that I was born with. Like that's why I can do other languages. That's why I can do music, because I have a good ear and I'm a good imitator.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I loved it and I wanted to learn Japanese more. And I happened to go to a high school that was one of 5 in Michigan that offered Japanese. So I took Japanese.
Oh.
And it was great. And the first time it was 2 years of Japanese. And then I got to go to Japan with my karate teacher when I was 17, 18, maybe. And I realized that the way that they teach any language in school is not super practical.
Right.
Right. So I ended up getting a tutor and really wanting to dive in and learn how to do it. And I did it in college. And I ended up getting a job as a translator for a company while I was in college. And I just dove into it because I loved it. And I just wanted to be better at it and wanted to be able to speak Japanese like a Japanese and all that. And I ended up, again, in the way that I always do. I'm kind of a lunatic I'm kind of obsessed with human performance. So I kind of deconstruct whatever I've done or someone else has done and said, like, how can we do that better? So I actually created a methodology. It's like a copyrighted thing. There's a name for it. I don't sell it really, but I've done coaching sessions with people. Mm-hmm. But it's about second language acquisition, and it's about being functional in a second language as quickly as possible. And most people, again, have heard the story that is true, that it's much harder to learn a language after the age of 4 or 5. Mm-hmm. I understand all the science behind that, and it is true, but it's certainly not impossible. And there are ways to actually be able to be functionally fluent. I feel like what took me 3 to 5 years of learning Japanese, I could take you to that same level in 3 to 4 months.
Oh, wow.
15 minutes a day, literally. So that's what my passion is, right? Is kind of like deconstructing the things that were helpful so that you can be even better than me by using these principles and applying them to other things in life, and hopefully make, a positive dent in the universe for the short time that I'm here.
So you're doing a lot of things with speech there and languages, but what's your thought process then behind even just other processes we have with formal education that could expedite? Because I feel like some of them are at a pretty slow pace.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you my opinion on this because I have strong opinions on it, but I will start with a disclaimer that I don't mean to denigrate traditional learning methods. Mm-hmm. I think when you have a school and a teacher that's responsible for hundreds of kids, it's very difficult to find a way.
Right.
Especially when they're all eventually going to be graded on a national test that they have to do well on. Mm-hmm. As Seth Godin loves to say, what is school for? The answer right now is it's for taking the test when you're 18 and getting in the highest bracket that you can so that maybe you can get into college. And he encourages everyone to say that is a 125-year-old mentality that made sense at the time, but does it now? Does it still make sense? So let's just ask the question, what is school for? So having said that, when I think about myself, so I learned how to play piano. I've never taken a lesson. I would not pass a 4th grade music class. But I've learned how to play. I've learned how to sing just by imitating. And right now I have probably 180 songs on Spotify and Apple Music and everywhere. I'm close to 60 million streams of my music just on Spotify. I've performed across the country from Vegas to New York to California. I've performed in Italy and Australia. I did a TV show in Japan. All that from a totally uneducated hack person, right? And I can tell you how I got there and apply that same thing to learning a new language. And I can also apply that same thing to any business principle, target market. right? Who's your target market? Like, what's the 80-20 way to find that? So I wrote a book on the topic of recruiting because I have a staffing company, and I started to notice trends in the industry where I felt they were doing things that they shouldn't be doing that are totally ineffective, and finding more efficient ways using technology to do ineffective things. So I wanted to write a book to make a dent in that. And all of that answer is just to say there really is not just one, obviously, but there is a framework that can help you simplify all of the complexity. And it really just starts with, what do you actually want to be able to do, right? And so the answer to that question when it comes to a language might be, you could say, I want to learn to speak Japanese. That's fine. But how do you know when you're done? I mean, you just, that's not specific enough, right? So I would always say, like, set very personal, meaningful goals. And so the step one is, I want to be able to have a 5-minute conversation with a stranger in Japanese. Like, I can be there in 2 weeks, right? Wow. If you want to do it. I can apply that same principle to, I just injured my shoulder or my knee. And as long as you're not immediately a candidate for, some kind of joint replacement, I've been in the top 1%. Every surgeon has told me, I've had a bunch of surgeries and injuries. In the top 1% of healing fast, meaning what I want is range of motion, and I want my strength back. And I get 99% faster because I apply the very same principle that I could talk to you for an hour about when it comes to how to hire the right person the first time. Mm-hmm. These things sound completely unrelated, but I realize that they are related, and that it really comes down to simplifying and getting specific on what it is that you want.
Interesting, because we work with a lot of small companies that struggle sometimes to hire good help. Sure. And even to take a step back on education, I can tell you from my own experience, and then I'll come back to that.
On that, and even if you agree.
Well, I didn't enjoy school, and what I learned is I didn't learn like most kids. And so I took the label, somewhat self-inflicted, that I was not a smart student. Today, that's not the case. I don't even view myself that way. I just learn differently. So when it comes to what you're talking about, I can endorse that completely. But if I have to sit down and take a test and you want me to be a 4.0 student, that's not going to happen. I'm very visual and hands-on. And so I learn with those visual aids and cues much quicker, where if you got to sit down and do, I'm not going to make a good engineer, but I can probably build it without any build sheet. That's just the difference, because I can visualize that in my mind.
Oh, hack. I love it.
So it's just one of those things. But jumping back to the staffing issue, because we see this a lot with companies, and oftentimes, and some of them will work with staff, with recruiters and things like that. But it really comes back to, I think, too, how the information that the company gives, how quality that is, to where the recruiting agency can even find it, or why they're not successful in hiring that person themselves.
Right.
And just an example of that, I think Heather does a lot of HR work with companies. They don't even have job descriptions. So when they are hiring a position, some of these people don't even know. In their mind, they kind of have a picture, but you can say, I need somebody to, do some installation work, but that's a broad stroke. And if you can start to narrow down and tap into the right skills and ask the right questions, you're going to get a much better result, I guess. I don't know what you're seeing with some of that on the staffing side of things.
I think so. I wrote a book called Why Technology Recruiting is Broken and What to Do About It, because I'm in technology. But it applies to everything. I mean, the principle that I believe applies to everything. So you hit it on the head when you said it starts with the company. What I find, whether it's a giant company that's, household name, or a smaller company that's not public and they're $100 million or even $10 million company, I'll start with what I think most companies do really well. they do a good job of branding the company as a great place to work for the right person.
Right.
It's great. That is a really smart thing. Where I think they fail is, here's what everybody wants, whether they have this vocabulary in their mind or not. What everybody wants when they hire a person is to believe that that person is capable and motivated, capable of doing the work and motivated to do this job here as opposed to any job anywhere, right?
Right.
So the big mistake that I still see everywhere is they think that the way to find someone who's capable is by saying, here is a job description. And then they don't describe a job. Instead, they have a bunch of bullet points that describe the attributes of a person who might be able to do the job. So in my world, they'll say they need to have 10 years of Java. That's a technology.
Right.
They need to have, 5 years of SQL database. They need to have, that's not a description of a job.
Right.
No.
A description of attributes of a person. So the way that I try and guide clients in this way, and so that we can very quickly really match someone who is looking for meaningful work and someone that is just like, oh, thank God we found this person, is by asking the question, when you say you need someone with 10 years of whatever, what do you need them to do with their 10 years of experience? Because in the end, we all know, I might get a job with your company because I have an in somewhere, right?
Right.
The day after you get hired, nobody cares what you have, right? He has an MBA. He has international business experience. He has 1,000 contacts. All you care about is what I can do with what I have.
Right.
So why don't we describe the what you do with what you have part, instead of assuming that every human on earth who's used Java or Excel for 10 years is magically has their hat in the ring to possibly be able to do this job when you've never described the job. So the way that I kind of hack this for everyone, and this is how I hire. This is how we hire for long-term, consulting roles. This is how I hire even independent contractors to do a really simple thing. Like, I have a 1-page brochure. Here's the text. Here's some graphics. Make it look pretty. Like even a 24, 48 hour project like that is, I find out from the client, or I describe to the person that I'm asking to do the work. I say, what are the 3 to 5 at most? What are the 3 to 5 most important things that this person has to do in order to be successful? The operant word there is do. As soon as you say, what do I have to do? Every sentence in your response has to start with a verb. So you can't say good communication skills.
Right.
Because I don't know what context that is. Now you might say, I'll say, why do they need good communication skills? Oh, because they're going to manage a team of 10 people. 5 of them are native English speakers and 5 of them are in a different time zone and they're non-native English speakers. Okay, great. That's great to know, because now I can find someone who has experience doing that and we can move on to the next thing. What do they have to do? And that, again, that sentence has to start with a verb. And in tech, I mean, for all the complexity of it, there's only a handful of verbs that you could possibly use, right? You build, you integrate, you upgrade, you administer security. There's maybe 10 things that everyone's doing. I mean, build Uber from the start. And you've got 5 bullet points of, I mean, they're very difficult. I'm not saying that the work itself is easy, but describing the work, right? Build the world's first real-time pricing algorithm that finds a bunch of drivers who are committed to driving right now this second and forecast the weather and the demand and create a price. That was $100 million project for Uber.
Yeah.
But I just said it in a sentence.
Right.
Work is not easy. But if they would have mistakenly said, what we need is someone with 10 years of whatever technology they used, like, okay, everyone with 10 years of that technology is going to be able to accomplish the the first build ever of that kind of thing, like that would be amazing. But not many people are qualified to do that. So
And often
that's really the question, right? What are the most then we're having a human conversation, right?
right.
So here's what I need you to do. Let's talk. I'm not sitting here folding my arms and saying, prove you're good enough. I'm saying, let's have a conversation back and forth about whether this is a good fit. It's a good fit if you believe you're capable of doing these things and you're excited to do them. So why do you think you're capable? Well, I've never actually done that, but I've done that in a different software. Okay, great. Awesome. So those kind of human conversations are what I'm really trying to make a dent in the recruiting world on. And unfortunately, technology does amazing things to make us more efficient.
Right.
I think that as humans, our default mode is efficiency, not effective. And as soon as you find something that works really well and it's effective, by all means, automate it, make it faster, algorithm, whatever you can do, make it better. But as soon as you multiply the efficiency of something ineffective, that's no good for anybody. It's just a downward spiral, right?
Right. There's you've brought up a couple times, and I just authored a book, I believe last year, right? So you've authored multiple books. What was the first experience like, and what was that book? And then kind of tell us a little bit about that. I feel like that's a whole nother chapter of your life.
Chapter, good one. You didn't even think of that, did you? You were just saying. So the first book I wrote I was doing a lot of consulting and translating for Japanese companies or American companies that were working with Japanese companies or were partnered. And I ended up I was teaching classes, I was doing at universities, I was teaching language classes at Japanese companies that had American employees. And I ended up consulting for this amazing, very well-known guy in the Detroit area, cover of Forbes, brilliant guy, and who basically invented an entire industry. And I worked for him for a few years, and I didn't know that he was kind of testing me the first day I met him, but he wanted like a 3 to 4 hour how to work effectively with the Japanese. So he was impressed enough that he brought me back the next day and he said, so here's the deal. We're looking at a big merger. They're a $2 billion company. We're looking at a merger with a Japanese company. I don't want any of my managing directors or VPs or anybody to talk to any of the Japanese people until they go through your program. But they don't have 1 or 2 days. So I need to get it down to like, what's the least they need to know to be effective. And as soon as he said that, I was like, what a great phrase, the least you need to know to be effective, right? So I ended up calling that book, The Least You Need to Know to Do Business Effectively with the Japanese. So it's a book for Westerners.
Okay.
Basically divided, there's a few reasons why I decide to write books and the blog that I do. One of them is I just think writing is a good exercise. I think writing makes you more articulate because it exposes unclear thinking. So when you read over something that you wrote and you're like, man, I repeated myself, I didn't really get my point out, you have a chance to go back. So it helped me organize my thoughts about the topic. And I intentionally wrote it so that it was a very quick read. And I ended up doing kind of like a 45-minute version of that with executives who, some of them were American or Western, English speaking, non-Japanese speaking, who had worked for Toyota or some Japanese companies for 25 years. And every one of them was like, where were you? I really thought that I knew everything, but where were you decades ago? Like everybody needs to hear this. And it was nothing magic. It was just it was like half of the book. And again, this really is just articulating my mentality towards how to look at this. You could apply this to every other culture and language and how to do business with. But really, it's just broken down into what is culture? What are the elements of culture? Why do cross-cultural misunderstandings occur? And then you look at it and say, what are the exact elements of let's say, the American and the Japanese culture, because there are very specific things, values and things that might be different that are going to come up. And that's going to cause a lot of confusion over assumptions, right? So I'll give you one really, really simple example. A first meeting among business people. If I were in a meeting with you right now and you were considering buying my product or service, as Americans, we would do a nice introduction and, hey, it's nice to meet you. And where are you from? Okay. And then when we would get into business, you'd say, all right, tell me what you do, Steve, and why I should consider buying your product. And then I would launch into a whole thing. And that's just a normal thing, right? Nothing wrong with that. The assumption with Japanese people, typically, when they get together, is the purpose of the first meeting is to gain context for one another, personally and professionally. I might not even give you a brochure, or it might be the very last thing I do, but we're just gaining context. So just knowing that that's different, different behaviors are going to manifest, right? So the example that I always use for Americans to easily understand that, because they say, well, that's just a waste of time, right? Well, about this. For most Americans, most of the time, what's the purpose of the first date? Let's say you're on a dating app and you want to find your partner, and you're a man who's looking for a woman, and you somehow come together and you say, let's meet up. What is the purpose of that, right? So let's say both people want to get married and have kids. Do you start planning your wedding on the night? Like, let's say the first 10 minutes goes great and you're both attracted to one another and you live in the same area and have the same values. Do you just start planning your wedding? Why wouldn't you? That's logical. Why waste time? I don't think most people would do that because it seems a little quick. It seems a little like pushy almost, right?
Right.
The way that I think about dating as an example is the purpose of a first date is simply to gain enough context for one another so that you can both decide whether there should be a second. That's it.
Yeah.
So if both people, whether they can articulate that or not, or it's in the back of their minds, that's really what they're going into it with the idea of. And so most people aren't saying, do you want to get married in a church or on the beach? And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, my name's Steve.
I want to meet your family before we plan a wedding.
Yeah. I mean, like, hey, let's so. But logically, you would think if they're getting together for the purpose of possibly getting married, why don't we just be logical about it, right? But there's still certain kind of cultural norms, right? So there's so many things like that you wouldn't know about the American culture.
Right.
So you wouldn't know about the culture you're studying unless you had kind of a background, and then you can appreciate how and why you do business certain ways. So that was the idea behind that book that I wrote.
We're going to follow up this podcast with another episode, so please look for this one next week.